Welcome to Profile. I'm Paula Hersey, and I'm your host today. And we're sitting here with some very exciting folks that are part of a new week-long event here on Cape Cod called Oyster Week. We have Ron Zweig, and we have Karen Doset, and both of you are involved in the World Oyster Symposium and all things happening with oyster. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and how you're involved in Oyster Week? Karen?
Well, all right. We became involved, meaning the Living Arts Institute became involved as the organizing agency for the International Oyster Symposium, which is the sixth one that will be happening. And we are bringing that to this part of the world. Typically they have been held in Asia. And so this is the first time in the West, so it's very exciting. It is a symposium out of the World Oyster Society, which is based in Japan. And headed by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mori, who's also the president of the World Oyster Research in Japan. So
my goodness, I didn't realize it was based in Asia.
Yes,
most of it.
yes.
So how exciting for the Cape to actually be part of that, huh?
Well, very much so. And of course, the oysters are huge over there. In fact, Ron can comment on that, but they can actually be seen from space, 5 miles out into the ocean, you know.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Ron, a little bit about your background and what are you doing here on the old sandbar?
I'm a wash ashore. I've been living on the Cape and off for about 40 years. But a lot of my work has been in Asia, and a lot of work, I started here in aquaculture really, so my background's in aquaculture, aquatic resources management, coastal zone management, these kinds of things. And the interest and so oysters were part of the bouillabaisse, so to speak, of the things that I worked with, including mussels and scallops and seaweeds and other things with sort of an integrated marine aquaculture systems. They're sort of ecological systems and help each other, growing the different organisms. And oysters are really like the great engines out there, the great engineers that assist us with water quality management, while at the same time being very tasty. So that's a nice side benefit to them. But a lot of the focus here is that in Falmouth, as well as Mashpee and Wellfleet in particular, although other towns in Barnstable and Cotuit and other areas, have been oyster aquaculture born, and that's been going on for more than a century here on the Cape. And so it's pretty well developed, but not that large scale in a way. It's been pretty well focused to a bit. But now there's quite a bit more interest now because we have a very serious water quality management problem on the Cape that's going to cost, they estimate billions of dollars, 4 billion, 8 billion, depending on how it's approached. And so the Cape towns and Falmouth in particular is looking at a number of alternatives, and one of them, from eco-toilets to permeable reactive barriers. This is technical things, but the aquaculture part of it is really quite exciting because not only is it a water quality improvement system, because there's no feed. Basically, the nutrients, excess nutrients, end up in plankton, and the plankton is then filtered by the oysters.
And this would be to clean up the embayments.
It cleans up the embayments,
correct. That's
so
correct.
it has that, and then it has the benefit too of job creation. Then there's sort of an economic multiplier effect from shellfish, which has to do with all the middle people as well as the restaurant trade and home consumption and everything. So it's really a huge opportunity here that we have to deal with a problem, really. So we can turn a problem into an opportunity and a benefit. And I think that has been that's been something we've been working on for about in Falmouth for about 4 years, and we're working with the State Department of Environmental Protection as well, because they are the regulator in terms of water quality issues and things. And so they, as well as our local Conservation Commission and the Marine and Environmental Resources Department, the Board of Selectmen, I mean, it's very much involved there as it is in other towns. So it's so what we're finding now is that after we started this initiative about 4 years ago, and as of last year we got the first oysters in the water, And what's been amazing is that because we started very early, engaged the community, the neighbors, that they love the project for the most part. I mean, it's very supportive. You know, it's,
Yeah,
well,
right,
the thing is,
right,
it's a
exactly.
change. There's a change, right? There is some visual aspects to it, and some people are more sensitive to that. But these folks saying this is the future, they can see it, they understand the dynamics. And so anyway, I'm going on a little long here, but I could, you know,
It's
so I'll try
okay.
and,
Yeah.
but,
It's fascinating.
yeah. So anyway, so it's been a very impressive. And last year was our first year actually to get a demonstration project, a research project in the water with a very comprehensive water quality monitoring program with the University of Massachusetts School for Marine Science and Technology being directly involved. And the first report came out last spring, and the results were better than expected.
Really?
And so now they're trying to find out why they were better than expected. So they're doing additional testing to try and work it out. So and the neighbors are saying the water's clearer than they were into their memories. The odors are gone. There had been fish kills. There are no fish kills, and it's really making an almost immediate impact. So it can be part. In some cases, it might be the whole solution. In some cases, it might be part of the solution, but it has a lot of benefits to it.
Right. I'm absolutely fascinated by the technology itself. I'm actually the president of the Cape Cod Technology Council, so the whole aquaculture coming back to your roots, but actually using some of the oldest known to man kind of science really to do this is just amazing. And you're not getting a lot of pushback from the communities, which is really nice as well, because as we know, everybody who tries something new on Cape Cod has to go through the gauntlet, so to speak.
Right.
So
Right.
it's very heartening to hear that neighbors are behind this project. How about you, Karen? Are there other things that you see with this Oyster Week and having the symposium here in 2015? What's that mean for Cape Cod?
Well, it means quite a bit because the symposium is geared for science, industry, and culture.
Okay.
So we're really taking a look at the oyster for anybody who has engagement with the oyster across those areas, anywhere in the world. So it really is going to bring the oyster world to Cape Cod in a way that it hasn't had before. So that involves tourism, it involves creating new partnerships, new opportunities for trade and export, import, et cetera. So it really will have a long-lasting impact. And we decided to start with the Oyster Week this year, and Dennis is the inaugural town for Cape Cod Oyster Week.
Dennis.
And where the expectation is that other towns, so we'll have an actual oyster trail during...
Hey, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, from P-Town all the way to Falmouth and Woods Hole. And then, of course, the Oyster Symposium will sit within Cape Cod Oyster Week. Okay. So there'll be lots for people to do and lots for people to be drawn to, the Cape. And that will remain after the symposium.
Right, and what we're hearing now, obviously, with the Oyster Week is inaugural, is there's a lot of events that are happening this year, obviously this week, that will obviously be duplicated next year as well, bigger and better, I would assume.
Yes.
There's a oyster tasting. Now, I love oysters, and we were talking before the show that there's, every town says their oysters are the best. So, of course, right? Well, we're partial to Dennis oysters.
Gee, I wonder why.
Shout out to John and Stephanie. But we're also, obviously, Wellfleet has a world-renowned oyster. People know of Wellfleet
Loves the
oysters
Wellfleets.
all over the place. What are some of the other oyster colonies or oyster places that you know of?
You mean beyond Cape Cod?
Beyond Cape Cod. I mean, there's got to be. I know Prince Edward Island has oysters.
Oh, yeah.
Oysters
Well,
and mussels,
oysters,
a lot of
mussels,
mussels
yeah.
up there, yeah.
Well, oysters, are found around the world.
Right.
And so all up and down the eastern coast, western coast, everywhere.
You're saying in Asia you could see
Yes,
them from space.
yes, absolutely.
And,
There's different varieties,
Yeah, the French have a very big shellfish industry as well. It's aquaculture. A lot of this is aquaculture now. because of a lot of things. Most of the reefs have been, the oyster reefs have been depleted, right? So now much of the effort is in that. And in looking at these aspects, I mean, in Asia, as you mentioned, you can actually go on Google Earth and go around the coast of China, and you will find these very large developments. And they are not just oysters, though, as I said, it's a combination. And you'll see, and what's interesting is that, like, they have fish cage culture as well. So they're growing fish, but with fish you have to feed them.
Correct.
So the waste from the fish goes into the water, pollutes the water. So then they surround the cages with oysters, with scallops, with mussels, with seaweed, and that's the kind of thing. And the arrangement, and they're doing, the science is being worked on to get the balance right. And like in Sanggu Bay, which is in Weihai, which is at the end of the Shandong Peninsula in northeast China, on the what's actually on the East China Sea, but it is an area where they've worked it out where 10% of the area is for fish cages, and then you've got the scallops at about 30%, and then the seaweed for about 60%, and that creates a balanced system where they're able to then maintain good water quality. They grow sea cucumbers underneath the cages, so the particulates. So it's this, so a lot of things we're doing here are kind of mimicking some of that in terms of water quality management. That's a dimension that hasn't really been explored too much on the Cape, but in Mashpee as well as Wellfleet. This work has been going on for a while, and Wellfleet's taking one approach with oyster reefs, which are like protected areas. They're not for fishing or capture. They're established for water quality maintenance. And other areas, it's more looking at the aquaculture from the economic standpoint. And just as an example, the project in Falmouth, it's a 3-year demonstration project. The total cost is about $300,000, which had about $70,000 for design work, all the equipment that'll last 10 years, and all of the effort and the monitoring, which is a big part of the cost, is included in that $300,000. Well, last year we had our first partial crop that was moved from Little Pond, which is closed to shellfishing because of water quality, into other embayments where you can harvest the oysters. And this year alone, the wholesale value of those oysters is about $600,000 to $700,000. That's from the three. Then this year's yield should be closer to $1 million coming out next year. Next year's yield will be just from the demonstration, which is a small 2-acre operation. So we're basically in that aspect. We're generating should be generating close to $2.5 to $3 million from the $300,000 investment over the 3 years. Plus the equipment.
And super clean water.
So it's cleaning the water. So you got.
So it's like a win on top of a win on top of a win.
And then of course the oyster shells are made of partially calcium carbonate, which means they're sequestering carbon dioxide, which means they're also, in a small way, there's the climate side, but it's a positive. Okay.
But it's a positive, right?
What ends up in the shell, that's where it's captured. So there are, you can go on, and then the economic multiplier effect I mentioned with the benefits down the chain of transport and the restaurant trade and everything. So it's really
and all of this is going to be, put forth in the symposium, so that we're all going to be learning, from each other, and not only the projects locally, but in other states and in other countries. So it's going to be very rich, very dynamic, and taking a look at the successes and also some of those, roadblocks, what and how people have worked around them, whether it's through regulation, whatever. And so we're going to really get farther together through the interaction and
not really working through them. Finding our way through them. It's possible.
Well, okay. Yes, it is.
It's
of
possible
course it's possible.
Because everyone wants a successful outcome, regardless of the different agencies.
And that's where we're starting. That's where we're starting. So in that, we all have our own kind of love affair with the oyster from, wherever we are with our engagement with it. And so that's the common ground on which we stand, and that's where we're looking out from. And so that's the kind of symposium that we are fashioning up.
And I like the regional approach to this too, that you have more than just one area kind of looking at this as a solution, is that everybody, you know, from Wellfleet to Mashpee to Falmouth are all looking to be part of this. As a resident of Cape Cod, let's just call ourselves the Cape Codder, how do we educate ourselves on more of this and be an advocate for it?
Well, that's part of the reason why we're doing this in the way that we are, is to bridge that info gap between the hard science to the person in the general public, and across the age span.
Right.
And so we're doing some innovative programming. The symposium itself will have aspects that will be very engaging for the general public, and the general public is invited. There'll be an expo, which is for science and education, along with the trade show aspect of it.
Right.
There'll be the technical sessions for the scientists to compare their data and looking at oysters under the microscope, et cetera. And then there'll be a day of interdisciplinary engagement, so that we are having people from the insurance industry, along with policymakers, along with the oyster farmers, so we all really engage in the conversation to kind of move forward.
I'm so looking forward to
Yeah.
this. Next year is the symposium. We want to make sure people understand that it's not this weekend.
No.
But this week is Oyster Week,
Right.
and it's kicking off a year before the symposium to really gauge awareness, get people excited about the oyster. And why oyster and not a little neck? Is there?
Well, the oyster is a keystone species. It's,
Actually, little necks do the same job.
Right.
They do it like with 1/3 the efficiency.
I got it.
Right.
So the oysters are really much faster growing and much more, thereby, in terms of the water quality side of things,
Right.
much
So the
faster.
clam is the
They're the
fluorescent
kind of
light bulb, and the oyster is the LED.
In a
Right.
way, you could look at it that way.
Well, and the oysters create, reefs.
Right.
Reef systems, and this is very critical. And I know, Paul Greenberg has a new book out, American Catch, and looks at the oyster, the salmon, and shrimp as really helping us to understand the evolution of our fisheries industry, and wrote about the aftermath of Sandy, and had there been the oyster reefs and the protection, it kind of helps with the storm surge, and of course the relationship of the marsh and the grasses and being the sponge, and so these dynamic living shorelines, which is what we're becoming more doing a lot of thinking about and planning, is really the way that we need to be moving.
In
Go ahead.
Falmouth, we're actually looking into setting up oyster reefs for erosion control, because we're getting some areas that are eroding away, and you have to keep rebuilding it and putting heavy revetment in. And so it's one way. It's not. We're just at the beginning of this, but you can look at that all along, just as in more dramatic thing like Hurricane Sandy and what happened there with the absence of the reefs. So it's another side to it.
and it's very exciting too, because one of our collaborators is Kate Orff from Scape Landscape, and they had Rebuild by Design, as a response to Sandy, and so they were awarded $60 million to work with creating infrastructure to help give Mother Nature a leg up. Right. So she'll be sharing that work, and there's other projects of that type, going on around the world. So we'll get enriched, from our exchange, local exchange, and regional, national, and international.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And speaking of enriched, we can close with, there is an oyster tasting, I hear, at the end of this week.
Oh my God, I can't wait. I have looked at what those chefs are creating.
Is there a website we can direct people to?
Yes, the oystergrandtasting.com.
Oystergrandtasting.com, folks. Oyster tasting next week. I believe the Seacrest?
It's at the Seacrest Beach Hotel right on the water. It's from 5 to 7:30. We are being graced with Dr. Mori himself, who's coming from Japan.
Awesome.
We have an oyster large-scale sculptor coming from the UK. He's going to be presenting a plaque to the selectmen of Falmouth. And it's interesting. It's just a little aside. This is the kind of thing that the oyster is sort of inspiring, because it's an interdisciplinary project where art is meeting engineering. So this giant oyster is going to be sitting in Falmouth in the UK at the water's edge, and it is engineered to open and close with the tide.
Oh.
So,
well, how cool is that?
Yeah, very cool.
And then you get to taste all these different oysters from these renowned chefs as well as this oyster tasting. I took a glance at the menu. My goodness.
I know. We feel very, very, very fortunate. And what's wonderful, this is really kind of a kickoff. It's a fundraising event because of course it takes a lot to bring the symposium and the potential of what the symposium can offer us and others forward. So that is really launching, and so we're very grateful for their generous participation. And so we're looking for the community as a whole to embrace this, and if we all do our part, just like the oysters, one oyster filters 50 gallons. Do the math. Think of what...
One oyster, 50 gallons, huh?
A day.
A day.
Yeah.
It's like, well, to get it in perspective, it's like the volume inside your bathtub. Wow. One little oyster. So you think, well, what can 1 million do? Well, what can 100 million do? What can 1 billion do in terms of water quality and coastal protection and all of that? So it's very exciting. Very exciting.
This has been probably to date my most favorite interview for the simple fact that I learned so much just speaking with you today. So I'm quite again, a little bit of a techno geek. So the whole aquaculture, and then you bring in engineering and math, and I was like, wow, that sounds like steamers. Which is great. Let's see, the Oyster Week is happening this week. Dennis is the kickoff to it, and there's an oyster tasting at the end of it next week in Falmouth, which is where the Seacrest is.
That's correct.
And
this coming Sunday.
This coming Sunday, yep.
The 26th.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Excellent.
At 5:30?
5 to 7:30.
5 to 7, and the website again was?
5 to 7:30.
Yep.
oystergrandtasting.com.
oystergrandtasting.com. I'm Paula Hersey. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Ron. It was a wonderful interview. And folks at home, get ready for a grand oyster tasting in the Oyster Symposium in 2015. I'm Paula Hersey, and this is Profile.